As of this moment, I am of the opinion that Joe Biden will drop out of the 2024 race. You've got a combination of the impeachment scandals, the inquiry is being launched, and it is bad for Joe Biden. But on top of this, you not only have Nancy Pelosi outright saying Biden may drop out of the race, laughs and refuses to say if Kamala Harris is the best running mate. You have a spattering of news articles, commentary coming out all right now about how Joe Biden is too old. You have commentary. You have general news reporting about Biden's age. You have polls coming out saying Democrats think he's too old to be president. All of these signs indicate Joe Biden will drop out. We've talked about this. The likelihood that he is the candidate moving in 2024. And look, you know, I don't know, right? I feel like looking at all of this today, which the context may change, the variables may change. And for all we know, Joe Biden comes out with some kind of, you get some gene therapy and then he's super ripped. Maybe he is. Maybe he is. I just think there is a greater than probability chance Joe Biden drops out of the race for one reason or another. Now, we've talked about how, you know, Gavin Newsom maybe runs out to save the day or something like that. But I don't see how Democrats legitimately try to run this man when the New York Times, the Washington Post, when pundits across the board are all saying he cannot do it. There's no enthusiasm for this man, and there's no enthusiasm against Trump like in 2020. And then the news headline right now that I think matters is Nancy Pelosi saying Biden actually might do it. The reason why I think it is likely to happen that Joe Biden will drop out is because this looks like we are being primed for something. They know Biden can't get the support because people don't think they think he's too old. He's incapable. We've seen a lot of stuttering, a lot of accents. They've tried to cover it all up. But the reason why I think now more than ever that he may actually drop out of the race. I'm going to say it again. I want to be a little bit more definitive than this. I do fear being wrong. Don't get me wrong. I'm looking at this and I'm like, I don't see how he does anything else. The impeachment inquiry is going to be bad. They're going to start pulling up a lot of crazy stuff. If Joe Biden drops out sooner rather than later, the Democrats can avoid the negative press surrounding their presidential candidate. So when you add these factors together, the most logical thing is for them to get Joe and Kamala out of the race, bring in Gavin Newsom. And we all know it. We all know that Gavin Newsom was the path for them for a while now. But look, the impeachment is going to be a stain on the entire Democratic race. Maybe, to be fair, there's a chance that Joe Biden loses a primary. Not that I think there should be one, but Biden would have to come out and be like, there should be a primary and let the people decide, which would be weird and would effectively be him dropping out. But all of these articles saying Joe Biden's too old, a convenient move now for the media establishment to provide cover as to why Joe Biden is going to disappear. If he stays in the race, they're going to prop up everything Joe Biden did. And it's a lot. I love how they keep saying in the media, no evidence, despite there being no evidence of wrongdoing. And it's just like, wow, you'd think leaked emails, leaked text messages, 2 eyewitnesses who worked with the Biden family confirming it, sworn testimony under oath from a victim of influence peddling, and a 2019 article from Politico titled Biden Inc., how middle-class Joe's family fortunes tracked alongside his political career. There's a plethora of evidence that I think is enough to actually present to a jury and get a criminal conviction, let alone an impeachment. But the impeachment inquiry will now line up all of this evidence and basically then present it towards a grand jury. So let's shift the political to the criminal. In a criminal proceeding, there's an investigation. They find evidence. They then bring it before a grand jury. You are not in trouble yet. The grand jury looks at the evidence, determining if there is a preponderance of evidence to suggest the crime may have been committed. They will vote to indict. The indictment is then levied against the individual, who then gets to go to trial to sort out whether or not, beyond a reasonable doubt, this person is guilty of that crime. Where we are right now. The Republicans, effectively acting like prosecutors, have compiled a preponderance of evidence. The impeachment inquiry is them effectively presenting it to the grand jury, and then the Congress will have a vote, much akin to a vote to indict. This is an impeachment vote. Impeachment is not removal from office. This is them saying there is a preponderance of evidence that Joe Biden has committed a crime. We will now have a trial to determine whether or not he should be convicted of this. How do you get away from that? It is going to be massively damaging to the Democrats in 2024. They're going to be trying to run on whatever they can, but you got a faltering economy. You got war in Eastern Europe. You've got an ailing man who no one thinks can do this. And now, on top of it, massive political scandals bordering on the criminal. Simple. Joe Biden says, I am not going to be seeking re-election. Something happens where he drops out. That is the logical conclusion. But don't take my word for it. Let's hear what Nancy Pelosi had to say when she actually entertained the idea first. And I will stress, when you get former Speaker of the House Pelosi, one of the top Democrats, being like, he might actually do it. Come on. What logical path do they have? Everyone, I feel like everybody feels this way, that Biden's going to have to drop out. So I'm like, at what point do we just call it and say, you know what? I'm not saying it's I could be wrong. I'll put it that way. But I feel like if I went to a casino and they had a roulette wheel, Biden runs, Biden drops out, I'm putting my money on Biden drops out, because I think it's like a 2-to-1 coin flip. It's like 70-80% likely that he does. I don't know. That's all I can say. But I could be wrong. I can't see the future. The Daily Mail reports former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi conceded Joe Biden may drop out of the 2024 race, then smirked, laughed, and dodged the question when asked if she thinks Kamala Harris should run to be reelected as vice president. Worryingly for the president, Pelosi also gave an evasive answer when pressed about whether his career will continue 2024 and beyond. Asked if she thought there's any chance Biden does not continue running, she gave a less than definitive, I hope not. The 80-year-old president, who is the oldest ever elected, has faced growing questions over his cognitive abilities, with more of the criticism coming from his own party. Pelosi, 83, also gave a classic non-answer to Anderson Cooper about Kamala Harris. Oh, it's really funny. She answered, he thinks so, and that's what matters. She's very politically astute. I don't think people give her enough credit. Her values are consistent with the president's values. Why would she be vice president if she were not? Pushed again by Cooper, Pelosi still dodged the question, but began to smile, giggle, and even raise her eyes conspiratorially as she spoke. The CNN star was off camera at the time, and it's unclear if he did something to amuse her. Speaking through a smile, Pelosi said, she's the vice president of the U.S., people say to me. Well, why isn't she doing this or that? I say, because the vice president, that's the job description, you don't do that much. Oof. Yikes. There's the interview. Ultimately, Pelosi did have some praise for Harris. Yeah, I really don't care about that. Pelosi also laughed off a David Ignatius column in the Washington Post that challenged both Harris and her boss, writing, President Biden should not run again in 2024. Oh, man. Woo. However, he says not just Biden, but Vice President Kamala Harris should avoid running in 2024. It's painful to say that, given my admiration for much of what they've accomplished. But if he and Harris campaign together in 2024, I think Biden risks undoing his greatest achievement, which was stopping Trump. Let's roll, baby. We have this from the Daily Mail as well. New York Times and the Washington Post both run op-eds branding Biden too old for office, with the New York Times raising the specter of him dying before retiring like Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I do not see logically how Joe Biden actually finishes a run. Okay. All right. New York Times. Let's go there. Maybe Joe Biden doesn't drop out. He just, at some point, becomes incapable of running. So by default, he's out of the race. I mean, I'm not saying he dies or anything. I'm like a guy who's 80. The average life expectancy in this country is 79. Trump is near that. Biden's past that. Okay. Trump does seem rather spry, though, despite being overweight. You watch him play golf, and there's like a video where he like knocks the ball in the air and catches it. And people are like, Trump's spry. You know, he needs to lose some weight. And he's lost a good amount of weight. But Joe Biden, he's not. Joe Biden is struggling. Now, I don't think Trump has had any kind of like brain surgeries like Biden has. But there's some real risk here, especially when you see these videos. There's one where, Biden is crafty. And he was probably told to do this. They said, if you ever start having an episode, just keep rambling, no matter what you say. That's why we get the Trina Nana Shabbat pressure, Batacaf care, next Norescent. You get this gibberish, garbled nonsense from Joe Biden because look at the video. When Joe Biden says next Norescent, I have no idea what he was trying to say. Trina Nana Shabbat pressure. Huh? But when Mitch McConnell freezes, grips the podium, major national headlines. I think Biden knows if he's got tunnel vision, if he's becoming lightheaded, if he can't think straight, just mutter something because the media will transcribe it into English for you. That's what I love the most about Biden quotes. He'll be like, it's the economy, man. You got to get a good economy, economics, And then the media will write, Joe Biden gave a strong speech where he said, it's the economy. And then they'll cut out everything else. Or like they translate it for him. They do these really crafty things where like Joe Biden will say something nonsensical and he'll make in a powerful speech. Joe Biden expressed concern over the economy and a desire to strengthen it when he really just muttered the garbled nonsense I just did. I love that. And then what they'll do is you will be asked to give a quote on like January 6th and you'll say something like, they'll send you an email. Mr. Poole, do you think, what are your thoughts on January 6th? And I'll respond, January 6th was a horrifying day. And the people who committed violence at the Capitol should be criminally charged and appropriately sentenced. However, it is fair to say we've seen some acquittals as police had opened the doors and allowed people in. I think we have to take a measured approach and make sure that we're treating those who were violent as seriously as we can. That'll be my quote. What will they write? Oh, we can't write that. That's a nuanced and well thought out statement. They'll write, when asked about January, they'll cut the quote out entirely and write, when asked about January 6th, Tim Poole downplayed the seriousness of the violent insurrection and actually defended the J6ers. And then I'll be like, why don't you just post what I said? Because I was critical of the violence. They can just write their summary of it. That's what they do for Joe Biden. He'll go, and they'll be like, wow, what a powerful statement from the president. I don't see how a man in this mental state can carry on. And even the New York Times is basically saying he might die. Look, man, I don't want to think about it, but I'm not here to be mean or disrespectful in this statement. But Joe Biden is past the average life expectancy for a U.S. male. He's probably got the best medical treatment in the world. He's the president. We've seen pictures of his hand with like IV marks on it. So he's probably, I bet he's getting IV therapy. I bet he's getting nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide and vitamin IV therapy, as well as some stuff. I bet he gets stem cells. I bet they are pumping this dude full of stem cells. There are these, this stuff already exists. For those that listen to Joe Rogan, you know all about it because Joe's talked about it, but NAD plus, nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, I get that as well, periodically. It's all the rage. It's like, it's a vitamin IV drip, essentially. It's a B vitamin derivative. And my general understanding is that it provides mitochondrial energy for proper cellular division. And I got to be completely honest. We started getting it after getting COVID. Whatever Dr. Joe says, right? No, talk to your doctor, okay? But me personally, my vision, it's crazy. It's crazy. So a lot of people swear by this stuff. But it could just be hydration and vitamins, but that really does help. But I think Joe Biden's probably getting stem cells because they do these things where they'll send a doctor out to your house. They deliver stem cells to your house, frozen. The doctor will then come, or the nurse or whoever, the medical practitioner. The stem cells thaw, and then they put them in an IV, mix the bag up, and then inject them into your body. The stem cells target areas of inflammation and begin bonding with your organs to repair that damage. Now, I've talked to some of these scientists and business owners and medical practitioners about stem cells. There's a lot of MMA fighters. You'll see this because, again, like Joe Rogan had Joey Bravo. Am I getting his name right? Talk about it in his shoulder. I went down to the Cellular Performance Institute in Mexico because of a hip problem, and this cleared up a lot of my issues. It's crazy how quickly. And they talk about how this stuff cures you, right? So my question was like, what if you're getting blasted with stem cells, just blasted over and over again, and it just like starts repairing all your organs? Like, would you live forever? I don't know. But I'm willing to bet when we see those IV marks on Joe Biden's hands, they are giving him stuff you've never even heard of. I mean, he's a president. Come on. They need his corporeal form. The fact that they're arguing he might die, though, I'm like, it says it all right there. I got a handful of articles. The AP says Biden is widely seen as too old for office, and AP North Pole finds Trump has problems of his own. Yeah, fair point. You got this from the New York Times. Trump is really old, too. Yes. But the issue is, one, I'm not, for the most part, voting for Donald Trump because I think he's going to do a back handspring or a round off back layout or actually backflip off of the back porch of the White House into a superhero pose. It's because he wants to gut the bureaucratic state. And you don't need to be all that with it. You just need to be alive. And I hope he pulls it off. But I think it's fair to say when you look at Donald Trump speak in his videos, you can certainly criticize him for being, gross and a lot of things he says, but he's there. That's all that matters to me. I'm not so concerned with age. I know we often use age as the limit, but when it comes to old age, it's really about cognitive abilities and performance. For young people, it's the same thing when it comes to voting. I do believe, however, there are reasonable boundaries to be set, like 18 to 70, when we're talking about age restrictions on holding office. And that's because as much as you may want to say, perhaps it's a performance test to determine cognitive abilities and wisdom, that's just too complicated. I think it has to be just simplified. And when it comes to running for office, I'm not so convinced 35 is appropriate. And it's interesting when you consider that back in the day, if you were 16, you were like an adult for the most part. That's crazy, right? And we've eventually come to be like, nah. It is, in my opinion, kind of weird that we were like, if you're 14, you're a man. Like, no, you're not. 18, 21, these are generally good ages, but the body doesn't stop growing until you're like, 24 to 28, I think is like, between that age is when you finally just become who you are going to be. And then you start to age. So there's got to be age limits. I do think so. And there is an issue there in that there are a lot of people we really like who are older, but let's be real, man. Ron Paul, the legend. Yeah, I think retirement is good, right? He's a very old man. It's hard for him to hear. And as much as he's a legend that we love and respect, who just did what a good citizen would do in speaking about war and the Federal Reserve and inflation and all that stuff. Yeah, you get too old at a certain point. I'm 37. I still skateboard. I'm not about to go enter the X Games and try and compete with a 19-year-old. That's ridiculous. You adapt and you do what you can. And that's the reality. So, age limits are not absolute and they're not perfect, right? You might be like, look, man, Donald Trump is 70, was he 77? But he's still capable of doing the job. And I'm like, that's true. Yeah. So maybe 80 is the cutoff. I don't know. I don't know, because Joe Biden is much worse off and he ran for office before he was 80. Maybe we just say we recognize that there will be people who probably could do the job who are going to be in their 70s, but maybe 70 is the cutoff. Ideally, we want someone who's 45. I do think there are people who could be in their 30s who could do really, really well. The challenge, I suppose, is every generation has their market, their base. It's fascinating when, I'll put it this way. When I worked for Vice, I remember watching them do certain things methodologically, the way they would post or produce videos. And I said, this is silly. The new world of media online says we should do X. And they were like, no, well, why? It's obvious. Shane Smith, Gen Xer, his base and his audience, the people he was targeting, were his peers. He was selling a product to people his own age. That was the base he knew. I'm the younger guy coming in being like, why aren't you selling products to my generation? And it's like, it kind of was, but for the most part, it's not the world he lives in. So you have Gen Zers being like, oh, Tim Pool's music or skateboarding. I'm like, look, man, I don't exist to constantly try and figure out what young people are doing and then try and cater to them. I just do the things that I am, which caters to people my age. That's why the people who watch Fox News tend to be in their 60s, because it is a network that catered to them when they were in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and now 60s. Tucker Carlson was doing a really good job of getting young people, but this is how it works. I fully imagine, and we're watching it right now. I can look at the demographics. When I started working in digital media, the average age of my audience was like 25. Why? I was 25. I was producing things in a way that people my age had been experiencing, and we lived in this digital world. Now I'm 37, and actually, to be fair, I think the average age of our audience is like 32. So it is still a bit younger. Awesome. And I imagine there will be that wave where older people die off, but I age faster than the audience advances. So when I'm 50, the audience will probably be 40 or 38 or something. And it's because there's going to be a large group of people who are watching, but we don't do TikTok. And a lot of younger people are on TikTok. This is just the way things go. There will come a point where Timcast IRL will be a big show, and it's going to be watched primarily by people in their 60s. And it's going to be you and me. We're going to be in our 60s, and we're going to be doing this show. And there's going to be a decent amount of young people who pick the show up, but it probably won't be where young people are. That being said, there comes a point when you are too old to be that voice. Joe Biden's there. There's a certain age where you are old enough to command respect from the younger generation. We do have a lot of a huge amount of viewers who are 18 to 25. Don't get me wrong. They called. We had a couple of young people calling last night, and there's a lot of people who write in. So we know y'all exist. I'm not saying you don't, but getting younger viewers to pay attention to this world requires them to experience things within this worldview. Eventually, you're going to have a large portion of young people being like, we're the new generation, we're taking over, and you don't speak for us, blah, blah, blah. And I'll be like, I don't know, sure, whatever. Like, bro, I'm just going to speak. Do your thing. But I recognize if it comes to the point where we are no longer the core demographic, the money demo, well, then we're on the back end of that bell curve. So, the way I see it is that there will come a time right now at 37, you and I, we are the money demo. What this means is we are the people who are inheriting the workplace. We are the people who are inheriting the companies. We are beginning to take over the industries. People, Gen Xers are getting closer to retirement. They're in higher levels of employment, but it's not a question of who or if. It's literally when. There's going to be some dude, a boomer, and he's like, I'm retiring. He's going to be the CEO of some manufacturing plant. And it's like the board's going to have to name a successor. And there's going to be some dude who's in his early 50s, a Gen Xer, who's going to inherit the company. Eventually, that Gen Xer is going to be like, I'm retiring. And guess what? It's going to be a millennial who inherits it. That's just the normal process. Right now, that's all of us, the millennials who are now inheriting the world. It's why you're starting to see AOC might run for the Senate. Eventually, AOC is probably going to run for president because there's going to be no one else because we inherit the world. And then eventually we start to retire as well, and Gen Z will start picking these things up. Right now, Gen Z is entering industry and the voting bloc. This means that their interests are going to start competing with our interests, but we are the money demo. We are the people that are reaching the mid-level positions, holding large sums of cash. Don't get me wrong, boomers still hold a disproportionate amount of wealth, but boomers will retire and take that money with them, and industry will be inherited by Gen Xers and millennials. Once we have control of industry, it is going to be our opinions that matter most. Meaning, when it comes to lobbying positions, when it comes to what corporations want, it's going to be an older millennial and younger Gen Xer who are going to be like, they're going to go to Congress and say, this is what we need to see. I could not imagine this in my day. I mean, completely honest. Like when I'm 18, I did not imagine a scenario in which I was sitting down with a member of Congress, giving my thoughts on the state of the world and what should happen, and then watching them go to Congress and talk about it. I never thought we would be in that position. I'm not saying that my opinions, I'm like telling a member of Congress, like, hey, go talk about this. I'm saying when we have members of Congress on Timcast IRL and I say, here's how I feel, and here's how I think. And they're like, that's interesting. They talk about these issues. And I'm like, wow, it's really weird that what I'm talking about is hitting the floors of Congress. Well, yeah, it's not special. We just are being like responsible for what happens in this world. I don't think it's an issue of deserving it. I think it's an issue of if you are there and you are doing the work, people eventually will start asking you because everyone else retires. I asked this of the band Death Cab for Cutie. Big fan of those guys. Back when Chris Wallow was still in the band, I was like, how do you make it in music? Like, what's the secret? And the gist of what he said was, you just keep playing. The general idea being when they got started, there was a bunch of bands in the local scene and everybody would come to shows. But one by one, they would stop playing. They would break up. They would get jobs, but they kept playing. People liked their music. They made more music. More people would hear about their music and see their shows. And because they were always there, they built a base. That base kept listening to their stuff and following their new music. And eventually they're just playing these big shows. Why? Because they just kept doing it. Because if you're in a band and you give up right away, no one's going to come to your show because you don't exist. But if you're in a band and you're around for 10 years, eventually enough people know you exist. You've just been there. That's kind of how the machine works. We are going to see, Governor Matt Gaetz, perhaps. I mean, that dude's not going away. He's a fighter. Maybe senator, maybe even vice president, maybe even president. Who knows? Someone like Matt Gaetz, he's not going to stop and he's going to be in this position. He's going to build the clout, build the notoriety, and then eventually someone's going to say, we need someone to run for president. 2032, who knows? Who could it be? And they're going to be like, Matt Gaetz has got a massive presence. He's super well-known, famous. He's got a long career behind him. And if he announces he's running, he immediately gets tons of support. That's how these things happen. Now, I know Matt's probably thinking like, oh, I don't know about all that. But no, look, man, it's not a question of should you do it right now? Does it make sense? It's eventually there will be no one else. And the storied career will be behind Thomas Massie, Rand Paul, Matt Gaetz. And on the left, you're going to have the squad members. AOC will eventually be, like Nancy Pelosi, a weathered old woman who's saying, we have to stand by and do these things. President Matt Gaetz is awful. That's what you're going to get because we'll just be there. That's how it rolls. That being said, my point ultimately comes down to this. How is it that the boomers have not relinquished this power? They're holding on to wealth. They're holding on to power. And I think it's time that younger people start standing up and just taking these roles and assuming these positions, running for office. All of this being said, my main point is this. Trump is old. Joe Biden is too old. Ultimately, I don't see how we reasonably get through another year with all of the ailments Joe Biden has had. And it is entirely reasonable to suggest Joe Biden will drop out of this race. We'll see. Next segment's coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.